January 15, 1953. A train engineered for perfection thunders toward Washington at rush hour. It suddenly becomes uncontrollable, a 475,000-pound juggernaut carrying passengers bound for Eisenhower's inauguration. The brakes should have stopped it cold. Instead, a single closed valve left the Federal Express almost brakeless at 80 miles per hour, turning Union Station's basement into a crash site no designer imagined. How could American Rail's crowning achievement become a runaway missile in the capital's busiest station? The answer starts with a flaw so small almost no one saw it coming. A locomotive shaped like speed itself, the GG1 did not look like anything else on American rails. Its body was a single sweep of dark, seamless steel. No rivets, no seams, nothing to catch the wind at 100 miles per hour. Raymond Loewy, the man behind the Coca-Cola bottle and the Studebaker, designed it to be more than a machine. He wanted a symbol, something that would tell the world the Pennsylvania Railroad was ready for the future. The GG1's welded shell gleamed under station lights, a continuous curve from pilot to roof, painted in deep Brunswick green and pinstriped with gold. Even standing still, it gave the impression of motion. Arched windows, a slanted pilot, pantographs reaching for the wires like antennae on a deep-sea creature. Underneath the skin, the numbers were just as impressive. 475,000 pounds, 16 driving wheels, each powered by its own electric motor, 8,000 horsepower, enough to pull a string of heavyweight Pullmans from Boston to Washington without breaking a sweat. The GG1 could run 100 miles per hour on straight track, but it was just as comfortable gliding into the marble canyons of the big city terminals, silent except for the buzz of traction motors and the low hum of the transformer. Everything about the GG1 was overbuilt. The frame was a single welded girder, designed to absorb the shocks of decades. The trucks, massive articulated assemblies, let it snake through tight curves at speed. Engineers called it the smoothest ride on the corridor. Passengers barely felt the sway as it ate up the miles, night after night. This was the flagship. No other engine carried more trust or more pride. The GG1 was the face of American railroading in the post-war years, sleek, modern, and above all, reliable. It was the last thing anyone expected to see lying in a heap of bricks and dust. But on that January morning, the very qualities that made it a legend would be put to the ultimate test. The Federal Express was more than just a train. It was a nightly artery connecting Boston to Washington, D.C., threading its way through the industrial backbone of the Northeast. Every evening, it slipped out of South Station, gathering momentum as it cut through Providence, New Haven, and New York City, then barreled down the corridor past Philadelphia, Wilmington, and Baltimore. This was the busiest stretch of track in America, a line pulsing with mail, businessmen, and on this particular run, passengers heading to the Capitol for the presidential inauguration. Some were government officials, others were reporters or families with tickets to history. The train's manifest that night read like a cross-section of post-war America. Pullman porters in pressed uniforms, sleeping car attendants, travelers in overcoats and hats, all trusting the schedule and the steel. The timetable for Train 173 was tight. Depart Boston in the evening, arrive in D.C. just after dawn. Along the way, the consist shifted. Cars added or dropped, engines swapped from diesel to electric under the wires at New Haven. Then finally, the GG1 took command at Penn Station. By the time it left Baltimore, the Federal Express was running behind, the clock ticking against it as it sprinted the last 20 miles toward Washington. The crew knew every curve and signal, every downgrade that demanded vigilance. They had checked the brakes at every stop, tested the air, watched for anything out of the ordinary. On paper, nothing was out of place. The GG1 was in its element, eating up the miles with the silent confidence of a champion. But this was no ordinary night. The stakes rode higher than usual. With the city bracing for the arrival of dignitaries, every seat on the train mattered. The concourse at Union Station was set to become a stage for the powerful and the hopeful. The Federal Express was the last link in a chain of trust stretching from Boston to the heart of the nation. As the lights of Washington flickered on the horizon, the line between routine and disaster had never been thinner. Tucked beneath every passenger car sits the single most important piece of plumbing on a train, the angle cock. It is a simple valve, about the size of a soda can, but its job is absolute. When open, compressed air flows down the brake pipe, carrying the signal that tells every car to grip the rails or let go. When closed, it acts like a tourniquet. Air cannot pass, and anything behind it might as well be rolling on its own. The entire brake system depends on one continuous, unbroken line of air. Break that chain and the system goes silent. On the Federal Express, the critical angle cock sat at the rear of the fourth coach, a New Haven car, number 8665. Its handle is supposed to remain parallel to the pipe when open. But there is a flaw. The clearance between that handle and the coupler pocket is dangerously tight. A hard jolt, or even the motion of coupling and uncoupling, can nudge the handle sideways. If it moves, the valve can snap shut with a heavy clunk, and the air signal will never reach the rear cars. No alarm bell, no warning light, just quiet in the pipe. After the Baltimore stop, one car is set off and the train is recoupled. In the shuffle, the angle cock on 8665 ends up exposed at the rear of the fourth car. Somewhere in that process, maybe a careless bump, maybe the coupler flexing as the cars settle, the handle moves. The valve closes. The inspector misses it. From that moment forward, the brake pipe is dead beyond the fourth car. The locomotive and the first three cars still have air, but the rear 13 cars, hundreds of tons of steel and passengers, are cut off, rolling in the dark. To the engineer in the cab, nothing looks wrong. The brake pipe gauge shows pressure. The brakes respond to tests at every stop, but the system is only talking to the front of the train. There is no way, from the cab, to know that the rear cars have gone silent. The angle cock has turned the train into a divided creature, the front trying to stop, the back pushing relentlessly forward. The fate of the Federal Express comes down to a valve the size of a man's fist, hidden in the shadows between two cars, waiting for a single unlucky nudge. Out on the main line, the Federal Express was running at full stride, 80 miles an hour. The rails hummed beneath 16 cars of steel and glass. Every signal flashed green. The GG1 at the head was built to cruise at this speed, and the engineer's logs showed nothing but routine. But somewhere south of Baltimore, the train had changed. The angle cock on the fourth car had snapped shut, cutting off the air to the rear 13 coaches. No alarm sounded, no indicator flickered in the cab. The system was blind to its own failure. At first, there was no sign of trouble. The engineer's gauges read normal. Every time he tested the brakes, the response was crisp, because only the front of the train was listening. The rest, hundreds of tons of rolling mass, was along for the ride, unbraked and undetected. The train had become a two-part animal, the head still in control, the tail dead weight. The only clue came in the form of a subtle push, the slack running in, a sensation as if the rear cars had suddenly decided to surge forward. But at 80 miles an hour on a gentle downgrade, it was easy to miss. Slack was the whisper. No one heard in time. Earlier in the run, a similar problem had cropped up in Rhode Island, a stuck brake, an angle cock found closed, then reopened by a sharp-eyed inspector. That incident was logged and forgotten. Now the same invisible danger had returned, but this time, no one caught it. With the inauguration just days away, the Federal Express was packed with travelers bound for Washington. The manifest included families, dignitaries, and railroad men who trusted the schedule to the minute. Every one of them believed the GG1 would deliver them safely into the capital's heart. The approach to Union Station was always a test of nerves. The line dipped gently toward the city, a long downgrade that demanded careful braking. The engineer reached for the brake handle, expecting the familiar drag of 16 cars slowing in unison. Instead, he felt the train begin to run away from him. The brakes on the locomotive and the first three cars bit down hard, wheels screaming, but the rest of the train kept pushing forward, 13 coaches rolling silent, the airlines dead. He was riding a 2,000-ton sled, and the city was coming up fast. No warning, no second chance. The engineer's hands moved from habit to desperation. The Federal Express was now a missile, and every second brought Union Station closer. The operational failure had become a human crisis, and the countdown had begun. 3 miles out from Union Station, Harry Brower stared down the rails, hands tight on the controls. The speedometer hovered near 80. He eased the brake lever again, waiting for the familiar tug of 16 cars slowing in unison. Nothing. The train barely flinched, the GG1's own brakes locked, wheels shrieking, but the rest of the train shoved forward, 13 cars rolling silent, airlines dead. The city skyline grew in the windshield, closer with every heartbeat. Brower's mind ran through every option. He yanked the brake into emergency, still no bite. The Federal Express was barreling down a gentle grade, picking up speed where it should be losing it. At 2 miles out, the train was still hurtling at 60 miles an hour. 1 mile out, the station lights glowed through the morning haze, but the speed only dropped to 45. There was no way to stop. He slammed the throttle into reverse, risking the motors, desperate for any drag. Sparks shot from the wheels, the cab filling with the smell of scorched metal. The horn blared, a long, desperate warning that echoed through the tunnels and up into the concourse. In the tower, the operator heard the alarm and grabbed the phone. Runaway on track 16. Brower stayed at his post, refusing to jump. The train was now a missile, and he was its last line of defense. The horn screamed, the brakes smoked, and the station raced closer. Every second counted. There was nothing left but to hold on and hope the warning reached someone on the other side of the glass. The GG1 did not stop at the bumper. It slammed through the buffer block like it was made of paper, sparks shooting from the wheels as steel met concrete. The locomotive's nose punched straight into the station master's office. He saw the headlight burst through his window and dove out the back door just in time, leaving his desk and timetable to be swallowed by the storm of debris. The newsstand vanished in a shower of shattered glass and flying magazines. Then the concourse floor, never meant to hold nearly 500,000 pounds of moving metal, gave way. It snapped like a cracker under the weight of the engine and the first 2 cars. The GG1 plunged into the darkness below, tearing a hole through the marble and tile and landing upright in the baggage room. The trailing cars buckled and piled up behind, but the front of the train came to rest surrounded by rubble, its nose just feet from the waiting room doors. In the chaos, dust and silence settled together. The clock above the concourse stopped at 8:38. Stunned passengers crawled from the wreckage, dazed but alive. The engineer and fireman climbed out of the shattered cab without a scratch. Basement workers, saved by a lucky coffee break, stared at the giant machine sitting where suitcases used to be stacked. Not a single person died, not in the cab, not in the coaches, not on the concourse. 87 people were hurt, some badly, but the miracle was that every name on the manifest survived the fall. 5 days. That was all the railroad had. Eisenhower's inauguration was set, and Union Station was supposed to be the city's front door. Instead, a crater yawned in the middle of the concourse, with a 237-ton locomotive sitting upright in the basement below. The official memos landed hard. Restore the floor, conceal the wreck, keep the trains running. There was no time for debate or engineering miracles. Crews worked in shifts, sawing planks, hammering beams, laying down a wooden deck right over the hole. The smell of fresh lumber mixed with the dust of shattered marble. By the end of the week, the concourse looked almost normal. Only a faint seam in the floor hinted at the disaster underneath. Above, flags and bunting hung for the crowds. Below, GG1 number 4876 waited in the dark, surrounded by splintered tile and twisted rail. Railroad officials walked the floor in pressed suits, shaking hands with dignitaries, never letting on that a buried engine was just feet beneath their shoes. The celebration went on, but the secret stayed sealed under plywood and paint. The city's grand welcome was built on a cover-up, and the clock was already ticking for the next impossible task: getting the beast out. Getting the GG1 out of the basement was an engineering puzzle no one had ever faced. The locomotive sat wedged among shattered pillars and twisted rails, too heavy to lift in one piece and too important to scrap. Pennsylvania Railroad shop crews moved in with torches and cutting gear. They sliced the body into 3 massive sections, each one hoisted through a hole cut in the concourse. The work went day and night, sparks flying, steel groaning as the pieces were eased out of the wreckage like bones from a fossil bed. Every move was logged, every weld inspected. This was not just salvage, it was resurrection. Once the sections reached the Altoona shops, the real rebuilding began. Frames were straightened, shells were rewelded, wiring was replaced. The scars of the crash disappeared under layers of new steel and fresh paint. In the shop ledgers, number 4876 was simply marked as repaired. But everyone who saw her roll out again knew the truth. This was a machine that refused to die. For nearly 30 more years, she thundered up and down the corridor, a survivor in every sense. The GG1 had been tested by disaster and come back stronger, a legend forged in fire and concrete. Steel, speed, and a single overlooked valve. Sometimes that is all it takes to test the limits of trust and technology. Today, millions still ride trains engineered for perfection, but every safeguard is only as strong as its smallest part. The line between miracle and disaster always runs closer than we think. What would you trust under your feet?